Well, before I share the message, since tomorrow's going to be Mama's Day, and that's kind of a big deal. My mom's been gone for a few years, and the mother of my children's been gone for like 24 years. It's crazy. So I wrote this for my mom, and would it be all right if I just read it? When I was small, I remember being shy, and as a result, I viewed the world from behind your skirt. My world was different than what was seen by most people. Most people saw the world as hard and serious, but I saw the world as someplace fun. I saw the world in a way that serious could never change anything, because from above my head would always be a laugh, a chuckle. And I knew that it would be all right. This was the world I knew from behind your skirt. I lived in a safe world. I lived in a place where love ruled. I lived in a place where people were nice and sweet. I lived in a place where I was always accepted, because above my head would come a hand to pat my head or my back. And this was the world I knew from behind your skirt. I lived in a world that was certain. Other people lived in a world of change and doubt and stress, but I lived in a world where all the animals could fit in a single boat. I lived in a world where people could be swallowed by a whale and live. And I lived in a world where men were strong like Samson, but could still sing like David, because above my head was a song about Jesus. And this was the world I knew from behind your skirt. I lived in a world where everything would be all right. Other people were hurt and never recovered. But I lived in a world where a scraped knee could be healed in an instant with just a kiss. I lived in a world where beautiful arms could pick you up and dust you off, because from above my head would come kisses on my eyes, my nose, my cheeks, and my lips. This was the world I knew from behind your skirt. Mom, I still live in that world. When Bren died, I never went through it alone. When my kids were messed up, I never thought it was the end. All of my life has been shaped by you. You've always been the sweet voice from above my head. And when I see heaven the first time, it will be the world I know from behind your skirt. Thank you for enduring. Wow. Okay. Well, tonight I want to talk about a message that I'm going to call Changes. And I'm going to tell you some stories about the Apostle John. One of the things that I love about the gathering, and what I love about Sam, is that you come to church and you know that you're gonna open the Bible. Some people go, well, of course it's a church, but I go to a lot of churches where people have ideas and then they try to use the Bible to support the idea. And Sam always talks about this. He talks about, because of what he went through and struggled with faith, he really wants to always believe, and whatever the Bible says is going to be the thing that's going to control the opinion. How many of you appreciate that? I really appreciate that. And so tonight what I wanted to talk about is I want to talk about the Apostle John, because when Sam starts next week, and he gets into 1 John, we're going to just go through the Word. That's what we do here. But sometimes I think we need to talk about who it is. Like, we've been, as long as I've been here, we've been with Paul, right? And so now we're going to switch up, and maybe we don't know John quite as well as we do Paul. So I want to talk tonight about the Apostle John, tell you some stories about him, and then just talk about an idea that I think it's important for us to think about. The gathering is, what I love about the gathering is we've got a lot of 20s, we've got 40s, we've got, I think I'm like the oldest guy here, which is kind of cool. But we have such a range, right? And sometimes when we think about it, how many of you are not where you want to be in God? Okay? Yeah. I'm not where I want to be in God. And sometimes we can get frustrated. You know, we've got kids that sometimes are a little rowdy, you know, when they're here and going to get their food, and sometimes we wonder about, should I say anything or not say anything? But how many of you are glad that who the kids are now are not who they're going to be? Okay? And who I am now is not who I'm going to be. And the same thing is true. And I think it's such a great thing about our family here is that we can really think about the fact, if we can just be patient with one another, just hang on just a little bit, we're going to change. And we're going to change more and more into his image. So that's what I want to talk about. Because John was somebody that really changed over time. He really changed over time. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Bible and some of the things about that we know from the Bible first about John. And one is that he probably was somewhere around 19 or 20 years old when he met Jesus. So how many of you are in your 20s? Okay? All right, cool. We have a lot of 20s. And so I think it's nice that we think about that here's this guy that's writing the book that we're going to study, and he was your age when he first started walking with Jesus. And I think that's pretty amazing. But John the Baptist was having this big revival that's going through Judea. And it says that everybody from Judea and Samaria and from all over the region was coming to see John the Baptist. And here was this guy that walked about 70 miles to see what was going on with this guy, John the Baptist. We know that from the first chapter of John, because it says that there were two disciples. And then he names Andrew, and he doesn't ever name the other one. And the interesting thing about the Gospel of John is that John never mentions his own name. And so it's most likely that John the Apostle, who becomes the Apostle, was hungry for God even at a young age. I think that's cool, don't you? I think that's cool about you, actually, is that we have people here that come here that are hungry after God, even though they're just starting their family, they're just starting their careers, they've got so much on their plate, but yet here you are, running after God. And so that was true about John. He was also a fisherman, and that was a rough industry back then. He fished on the Sea of Galilee with his brother, also with Peter and Andrew. They were partners in business. And so here he was trying to figure out, how am I going to support myself? How am I going to support my family? How am I going to take care of my parents? And yet I've got this call on my life to follow God. Now, how many of you understand that that's something that we all struggle with? How am I going to follow God? How am I going to make a living for my family? How am I going to do this thing? And I'm still going to follow after God. Well, he was one of the first ones. John was one of the first ones to follow Jesus. He was by his boat. You know the story. He's mending his nets. They would fish all night, and then when the sun would come up, they'd get their nets all fixed and try to get them untangled and let them dry in the sun. When Jesus came up to John and his brother James and said, "Come follow me. I'm going to make you fishers of men." Think about that. Think about that. How many of you think that you would just leave Huh?
Leave Dad in the boat, too.
Left Dad and the boat
and business and everything.
Everything. And here he says, okay, I'm going to follow Jesus. It's not like he hadn't met Jesus, but he didn't know him for very long. And here was his job. Here's the way that he was sure that he was to make his career, make his living. But Jesus said, come follow me. And we see this guy left everything to follow him. But one of the cool things about the Bible, I really like this, is that the Bible doesn't always show people in the best light. I think that's great, don't you? I think that makes it true. You know, because if you would ask Carla, of course she's going to tell you how wonderful that I am. But the fact is, I'm not that wonderful. I love God and I want to walk with God, but I'm not perfect. And probably you're not either. And what I like about the Bible is that it doesn't sugarcoat anything. There's a couple things that I think we ought to think about this guy named John. And one is, since it's Mother's Day, James and John went to their mother, okay? And they got their mom to go to Jesus and to get down on her knees and beg Jesus to let James and John sit at the right and left hand of Jesus when he comes into his kingdom. Now, how many of you think that that's weird? I think that's weird. I would be so embarrassed. I would die. You know? But here they are. The Bible says that mom is on her knees in front of Jesus, and James and John are right behind her saying, go mom, go mom, go mom. And Jesus says, you guys are dumb. And not only did Jesus rebuke them, what happened is that the rest of the guys that were walking with Jesus said, you guys are really dumb. And so we see that John isn't always in the best of light. I think that we're going to be reading a book by somebody that was real. That is like us. The other thing that I think is interesting is because, you know, he has a nickname we'll talk about in just a minute, but one of his nicknames, what he refers to himself is the disciple whom Jesus loved. Okay? He never used his own name, but he would say the disciple that Jesus loved. Well, so sometimes we think of John as kind of a frou-frou guy, you know, a little risky maybe. And we think of him being really, really, really sweet. But you know what his nickname was in the group of disciples? You know what his nickname was? He and his brother were called the Sons of Thunder. Now, either they had intestinal problems or they had tempers. And I think it was that. I think that they were rough guys. I think they were used to being in the, you know, out on the sea. I think that their language was like most fishermen. And here they were, really, really, really guys with tempers. And I think, again, what he was then isn't the way that he ends up. And we're going to see that. Who you are now is not who you're going to be. So I think that's interesting. The other thing that I thought was really interesting about John, and that the Bible doesn't put him in a great light, is that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. Now, the normal way to go down to Jerusalem was to go on, you would go on the east side of the Jordan River, and you would go down there because in between Jerusalem and Galilee was a region called Samaria. And Samaria, those people were they were like heretics, and nobody liked them, and so nobody went straight to Jerusalem except for Jesus. And so they heard that Jesus was coming through, going to Jerusalem, and so the Samaritans, they were upset because they were going to Jerusalem. The reason for that is the Samaritans thought that they should worship God there in Samaria. And so because Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem, they said, we're not going to let him into town. We're not going to let him stay here. And so here's what John said, this great apostle of love. You know what John said? He said, hey, how about let's just call down fire from heaven and we'll just burn all these people up. How many of you are glad that who he was then is not who he ended up being? He's changing. He's changing. I think that's interesting, don't you? All right. The story of Jesus giving John the responsibility for the care of his mother. Now, when Jesus gets captured and he goes through all of the trial, you know, most of the disciples had run away. And they had just scattered with the wind. And what happened is that there was one disciple, and only one disciple, who stayed. And so there on the cross, when Jesus is dying, and we know that the women were there, the women disciples were there watching Jesus die, but we know that one disciple was there, and that was John, the apostle. And so Jesus looked down and he says to John, he says, I want you to take care of my mom. And Mom, I want you to accept John as your son. What does that tell you about this relationship between Jesus and John? To me, it says this was such a close relationship that the only person in the world that he trusted to take care of his mom was John. And we know from tradition that, in fact, John did take care of Mary. To Ephesus, and he took Mary with him, and it was there that Mary was buried. It's there that John was buried, that he died. And so I just think it's a beautiful, beautiful story here on Mother's Day, that Jesus trusted John to be able to take care of his mom. But just a couple of other stories that aren't in the Bible. A couple of weeks ago when I talked about the time that the apostles didn't recognize Jesus up in Galilee. And I told you about when Peter was just told about that. He said, do you love me? And he said, yes, I love you. You know I love you. And he asked him again, do you love me? Yes, I love you. Finally, he said one more time, he said, do you love me? He said, yes, Lord, do you love me? He said, feed my sheep. And then he went on to tell Peter, he said, when you get old, you're gonna be bound, and they're gonna take you places that you don't want to go, and you're not gonna be able to live where you want to live. And for me, you're gonna have to lay down your life. And so Peter, being Peter, you know what he said? He looked over at John, and he said, well, what about him? What's going to happen to him? And Jesus said, well, you know what? That's between God and him. And so it got to be a story that went around that John wasn't going to die until Jesus came back. The interesting thing is that John got to be very, very old. Like the average age at the time of Jesus would have been between 35 and 40. That was the average life expectancy. But John got to be about 90-some years old. And one of the things is that there was an emperor by the name of Domitian, and he decided that he was going to kill the last of the apostles. And so he captured John, and he decided that he was going to kill him. And the way that he decided to kill him is first he was going to beat him. So he did. And then he was going to poison him, which he did. And finally, he got a great big cauldron of oil, and he decided that he was going to boil John to death in this oil. And they lowered him down in this boiling pot of oil. Miraculously, he didn't die. In fact, the story is that there wasn't even any change to his body. And he just got up and walked out. And so what happened is they sent him into exile in that island called Patmos. You ever heard of that story? It's a beautiful story because it's the last book of our New Testament. Because it was there on that island where it says that John was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. And all of a sudden God began to reveal to him the majesty of Jesus, the majesty of things to come, and how the Son of God was going to rule and reign on the earth. It was because he had been through this persecution that he was on that island where God revealed himself to all of us for the last days. There's another story that I want to tell you about that maybe you've never heard about the Apostle John. Once he got released from the island of Patmos, he began to go through the region of Asia Minor. Like if you've read Revelation, you know there are 7 churches of Asia. And so John began to make a tour of these churches. And what he would do is he would set the leaders in these churches. There were lots of small churches. And John would come, being the one who'd walk with Jesus, and he would set people as the leaders of the church. And he got to a little village, and there was an elder there that he was going to set in place as the leader of the church. And he was in the middle of this service when all of a sudden a young man caught his eye. It would have been somebody like the size of Noah. I mean, he looked big and strong and tall, and he caught John's eye. And so John just stopped the service right there. And he said to the bishop that he had just said, the elder that he had just said, he said, I command you in the name of Jesus to raise this young man to know Jesus. And so the elder decided, well, okay, I'll do that. And so he took him into his home. He raised him. He discipled him in the Lord. He raised him up to know Jesus. And this young man was doing really, really well. He really loved Jesus. He was growing in God. But the bishop got busy. He got to where he expected this young man just to do right, to do well. He wasn't paying a lot of attention. He wasn't meeting with him every week. He wasn't continuing in what he had done. And what happened is this young man made some friends from town. And they got to where they were running around and doing all kinds of things. And before they knew it, they found that their lifestyle was costing them so much money that they decided that they were going to be bandits. And in fact, this young man was really, really good at it. He was a warrior. He was strong. He just loved to be mean to people. And so he became the chief of all of these bandits. And in fact, they were on a mountain just right above the village. And that's where their hideout was. After a few months, John came back to the church there. He came back to preach and just to check on the people. And so John said to the bishop, he goes, I've come to claim my deposit. Well, the bishop had forgotten. And he thought that John was asking for money. And he said, well, he's old and he's getting maybe a little senile. I don't have no idea what he's talking about. He goes, I don't remember what you're talking about. And he said, I come for the boy. Where is the boy? And the bishop says, he's dead. I said, what do you mean he's dead? How did he die? And he said, well, he's dead to God. He ran away from my instruction. He ran away from the church. He ran away, and now he's just dead to me. He's dead to God. And John said, go get me a horse. Go get me a horse. And get me somebody that'll take me wherever that boy is. And so here this 90-year-old man jumps on a horse, and he starts up that mountain. He said, don't go, John. They're going to capture you. They kill everybody that goes up there. He goes, I don't care. I'm going after my deposit. And so he went up the mountain. And sure enough, he'd gotten up the mountain a little bit when here were these young hoodlums that captured him, took his horse, and he says, I'm glad you caught me. Take me to your leader. And they did. Well, much to their surprise, when their fearsome leader saw John, he ran. He ran away as fast as he could. And here this 90-year-old man refused to consider his age, and he started running after that guy. And he said, I'm not going to give up. You might as well stop. And finally, the young man stopped. And he broke into tears. And he fell into the Apostle John's arms. And there he repented. And John accepted him back into the fold. And he became an example to everybody in the region of how God could change a life. Here was an apostle who at one point wanted to burn up a city with fire from heaven. Here was one who wanted to be the first, who wanted to be the highest, who wanted to be so ambitious that other people would bow to him. And here, in his old age, he had such a desire for people to know God that he would go to any length at all for somebody to know God.